Awesome. Well, hey, Chives, welcome to Main Street Markets. Excited to meet you in the live here, and interested to hear about your journey through investing. So to start off, what inspired you to start investing in the first place?
Well, sure, John. Thanks so much, first off, just for bringing me on board Main Street Markets. I love the concept of trying to communicate with as many different investors' backgrounds as possible from that Main Street perspective. Before I get into my own history, what I can say certainly is that the common stories we hear are from the Wall Street side, right? In the media, in common parlance, we see so much coverage and story about those folks, and so. The other side needs more of a voice. Always glad to see that. As far as myself goes, um, where I actually first got started with investing, I guess it depends on how far back you want to go. As a child, I was lucky enough for my father to put together, some basic like IRA kind of stuff through Cantella, and so there was some vague association there. But when you're 12 or 15, you don't know what's necessarily what's going on with that. And
Stella?
uh, I think the carrier was called Cantella, but I have not had that account in a while, actually. I'd have to double check, but they, just a one custodian versus another custodian.
Okay.
And
Okay.
where I think I really started to become interested in developing for the future was in I guess it was probably about 2012 or 13 where I first heard about Bitcoin. That was my actual start, and we can get into that. But it was something where that helped to illuminate some of the suspicions I'd already had about the unfairness in the markets that we see and the unfairness in the banking establishment. Living through 2008, which hit my family a bit hard. And there was a lot of difficulty there. And so there was a lot of anguish there that I didn't know how to place properly until I developed an understanding of the legacy banking framework through developing an understanding of an alternative option that was becoming available through the invention of the distributed ledger. So that was extremely empowering and something that drove a lot of my investing ideology and ethos and energy at that time. And that carried forward for several years until eventually I became disenfranchised with that after the 2017 hard fork. That's another contentious topic, but essentially the settlement layer was kind of moved onto a second layer. I'm sure your listeners might be somewhat familiar with blockchain terminology. I don't want to get too in the weeds necessarily, but point being, it wasn't necessarily a good match for me anymore at that point. And I kind of floated along a bit, did some basic other investing in companies I liked at that time or in other cryptos, but not really anything too crazy until I again became reactivated, as so many retail investors were in 2021 with the GameStop buy button debacle. And so that was, again, the kind of a sort of thing where I became more educated about the legacy system through an inciting event that made me really need to dive into and understand it. So I did not know much about the stock market then, although I had dabbled. And now I know a lot more than I did then. I guess I'll put it like that, And we meaning myself and other retail investors, not to speak for them, but to speak broadly ideologically, I think a lot of people are ever curious, now more than ever, to keep learning about the legacy system so that they can protect themselves, because it is a lopsided one with a clear information asymmetry, and it's difficult to properly understand what is happening when you, say, log into your broker dealer and purchase something. It's a lot more complicated than the USD in your account goes down and the amount of Walmart that you own or whatever goes up. There's a lot more going on, and it was pretty much invisible, I think, to most people until that inciting incident. And Sure, even now, a lot of people don't know, but long story short, I've gone on for a while, but these days, what I love to do is learn about this nuance and try to spread the word about it as much as possible.
Yes, I'm with you there.
Hey, hey.
So what was it like when what was your foray like? What was the story going from being a kid with that custodian that your parents had set up and you had maybe some shares gifted in there to really tackling the markets on your own?
Well, my father, I'd say, and my family in general, even through 2008, they're more traditionalists. The focus was on perhaps, diversification, operating within different market sectors, but still using the traditional framework. So, if I wanted to focus my IRA one way or the other, uh, that could be fine, but maybe focus on different areas, that kind of thing. And there's definitely something to be said for that. That's a very common investing strategy for people older than you and I, and younger than us too. I mean, that's just a safe way, right, to engage with the market in such a way to, I suppose, avoid volatility, which can be both good and bad. To actually answer your question, when I was first becoming more involved, and once I had wrapped my head around this new distributed ledger technology, uh, what I really wanted was to further expose myself to it. But at that time, in the whatever it was 2012, 13, I was in college, and working full time. But a lot of the money was going back into the education, so it's not as if I had a lot of discretionary income to actually put towards that. And but what I did have was time between studying to read more about it and to try to convince my dad that I was like, hey, listen, I need to get more involved in this. I would like to divest some of this. So I alluded to earlier that I don't have that same IRA group anymore. The reason being, at that time, that was something I eventually convinced was like, well, look, he didn't want me to do it, but you put it together for me, and this is something that I perceive as valuable at the moment, and so that is what I'd like to do. And so it was a point of contention, but eventually was able to enter that part of the market into that way. And the tax liabilities and all of this aside, it was still a valuable decision to be able to make to take hold of that equity which had been provided. And I was very fortunate to have that accessible to me. So shout out to the family for making that possible.
And so it sounds like that was early on in the whole rise of this blockchain technology space, and you're learning mostly about the distributed ledger things in college, more so than the finance information. Is that about right, Chives?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, as a
Seems like he'll be. Oh, there we go. Chives, welcome back. Not coming through on the microphone there, Chives.
there we go.
There we go.
Boy, I'm having such troubles this morning.
Oh no.
Well, it is what it is. Let's see. What was it that you just asked me?
So you're learning, it sounds like a lot through your college experience.
Oh, sure. Yeah. My college education wasn't something completely different, but as a hobbyist, I was extremely interested in specifically the democratization of I guess we'll say like the financial vote, how someone can impact their local economy through this new technology. I was especially interested even to go to local businesses that I knew were more mom and pop. And this is, back when Bitcoin's like $200, $150, trying to get them to see the value in perhaps accepting some in the college town that I was in. And just because, the credit card fees are 2.5%. At that time with BTC, the transaction fees were nil. It was instant. And, so just to explain the importance of the technology as like a framework for what was possible. Or alternatively, I would often use Western Union as an example. There were it was an area that had a lot of foreign population as well. And so those folks, they have to, send money overseas, costs 8-10% to send money, and it takes 2 weeks to get there. But if you were interested in, engaging with this kind of new technology, then you could have a lot more of that equity actually reach the family members that you cared about. And so those were the examples of the vacuum that I saw where this technology would be really valuable for people. And so I don't think that I landed on, like, I've really turned too many heads. I think it was maybe a bit too in the weeds for most people, but I did really try to explain that to folks. And that was just a big passion for me at that time. Yeah.
It sounds like you thought a lot about the global socioeconomic implications of some of this technology.
Well, sure. I mean, I think in many ways, if we go back to what the alternative was as a legacy system, it comes down to centralized trust, right? Like you need to, if you're going to be using some kind of token to make bartering easier, if we get into monetary theory for a minute here, but if you're going to be using some kind of token and that token ends up being cumbersome to carry around, or maybe you're worried about someone breaking into your home and taking all of your seashells away or whatever it is. So okay, now we develop the idea of a bank where that bank is going to be guarded and a central asset to a community to provide safety and allow more liquid access to this bartering token so that communities can develop and people can focus on what they want to focus on and how they contribute to their community. And all of this is good. And all that is very much appreciated in terms of that banking invention. The problem eventually becomes where folks that control this central ledger, saying who has what, they realize, well, okay, I guess that I could just if someone's coming out to withdraw their whatever it is, I don't actually need to always give it to them. I can just give them this slip of paper that will reflect whatever it is, and because everyone trusts my organization, they can trust this slip of paper. So even though it's not the the gold coin or the silver coin anymore, we can still conduct transactions. All right, so now we have the invention of kind of this paper money, and then on and on, they realize, well, I can actually dole out even more of these tokens than I have. I think that a lot of folks that have developed a skepticism towards the modern monetary tradition have probably internalized a lot of what I'm talking about. So maybe it's helpful for some who haven't thought about it in those historical terms, but I bet for a lot it's kind of intuitive that where we end up going from there is problematic, because people end up abusing the access to this centralized ledger and siphoning off valuable resources that might otherwise be allocated to community development for their own gain without really contributing anything to the system itself. And that is, I think, the premier advancement of distributing the ledgers, of taking that trust away from a centralized region and bringing it to something that everyone can share, because now you do not need to have a centralized entity that is going to be abusing its authority. And if people could be trusted to not abuse their authority and abuse their access, then it may not be as necessary to have this kind of technological advancement. Unfortunately, people are fallible and human, I guess I'll say, and so time and time again we do see weakness in them. And I enjoy the idea of not having to worry about that, and I think that's the promise of the modern technological financial revolution.
Very insightful, Chives. So am I hearing right that the legacy incumbents have the ability to sort of siphon away value from the current system?
I would certainly say that, yes, absolutely. I would certainly say that. And I think that were we to be able to ask some of the, Jamie Dimons of the world, or any of these other major, major folks, I think they'd maybe not see it that way. View it as that they're providing a valuable system. Maybe things like having a reserve of capital to be able to provide loans to individuals who need it, maybe would be more difficult with the distributed system. As one example of maybe there's an argument to be made that there are advantages to both sides. But ultimately, yeah. Not to ramble for too long, but I think that you're exactly right. And that is my understanding and my assertion.
It sounds like you've thought quite extensively on the history of the banking systems that we have in place. How have you seen those principles in parallel as you explore some of the financial systems and play more in turn with the GameStop event reference?
Wow, what a perfect tee up that is. So this is a terrific opportunity to mention how some of the same centralized trust that exists in the traditional banking establishment also exists in the stock markets. And this is an incredible thing that many folks are not aware of. And I'll try to cover a lot of it here, but I would very much encourage any listeners who are the slightest bit curious about what is about to be discussed, please look into this. And a great place to do that is WhyDRS.org, as you can see on John's mug there. Really love to see that. So to actually get into it, though, the vast majority of publicly traded stock is owned by a single entity in actuality, and that's the depository trust's nominee, CD & Co. And in all seriousness, they own legal claim to, we don't know the exact percentage, but 95% plus, 99% plus of publicly traded stock in America, and of U.S. publicly traded companies. The reason for that is because they want to be able to provide liquidity. Essentially, when you go onto your broker, and if you want to buy something, rather than needing to fret and to make sure that they can fulfill that delivery, having a centralized depository makes it very simple to switch some names in a computer system or switch some numbers around, and you are able to effectuate seemingly instant trade without any of this hassle on the back end. To say nothing of the past, where there were a lot of problems in the stock market's development. John and I, we've talked about this a bit in the past. Maybe we can, in the show notes or something, stick a link to our discussion about that. So briefly, as far as the history of the stock market, I mean, initially you have people trading paper certificates around, and similar to the discussion I had about the development of the banking and monetary system, those paper certificates represent vulnerability in terms of not only the cost of transporting them, storing them, but the dangerousness of if you're carrying around a bunch of stock certificates on Main Street or down Wall Street, as it were, and someone jumps you, that could be a major problem. And there were serious incidents that took place, and so there was a need to centralize the system and to provide safety and consistency. Now, that made sense then, but in a modern context where we have all sorts of different technologies that are available, it's possible there's a better way. In terms of with GameStop, what can happen in this centralized system is that while the DTC and their nominee can have however many certificates that are allotted to them, each of the individual DTC member brokers, they're supposed to have some individual allotment, and then together the sum of those allotments is going to equal whatever it is that the DTC is expecting to have. But those member brokers might actually choose to operate in a, let's say, potentially risky manner, where they could actually dole out additional share entitlements to their clients than they actually have in their reserve according to their account with the DTC. Now that might sound like gibberish. The share entitlement is what you're actually buying when you go through a broker. It's essentially an agreement between you and the broker that says, I'm going to be eligible to receive the profit and loss of whatever this thing is. I'm going to be passed on the ability to cast a vote, and so on and so forth. But it's not actual ownership. And so there involves risk where if a broker, for whatever reason, thought that maybe a stock is going to go down, what they can do is, they could, I guess it's like an arbitrage where the broker is seeking to gain financially by operating within the margins of these trades. I mean, the settlement window's 2 days right now. It's going down to 1 day in a few months, but that's still a lot of leeway for brokers to seek, changes in the price and capitulate profit to, even if it's a fraction of a cent. You do that 10 million times, make a couple $100,000, and you're pretty happy with that. That's let's see. I mean, I get lost in the weeds sometimes with this stuff, so I hope that I know that you're passionate about it too, John. So I don't think you mind.
It sounds like a lot of the same flaws in trusting the central institutions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the end of the day, when we have the opportunity to withdraw from that system, but still access many of the major benefits, then I think that is important for people to consider. I mean, first of all, to even realize that they have the option to withdraw, but then secondly, and importantly, to consider that maybe that could be right for them. In the case of the traditional banking establishment, there are, of course, tons of pros and cons there, but there are also, we've seen with 2008, this most recent crisis in 2020, whatever might be happening in the future, and many other examples that, perhaps it is good to try something else than a system which has borne repeated failures. And then similarly with the DTC and with holding stocks within this major conglomerate, accessing the, being able to access the DTC's framework. Like, for example, you need to be something called DTC eligible in order to be able to trade on the exchange, to transfer between brokers. It's essentially like almost like DTC is the highway, and there's all of these different exits and isolated places where your claim to that share entitlement could go. But if you were an individual who was passionate about one specific investment, if you really like Taco Bell, if you really like Home Depot, whatever it might be, then you could become involved with the company directly. There's an opportunity to do that has been around for decades, but has only really been entering the public conversation in a huge way since the GameStop debacle. And that's the direct registration, hence the DRS and WhyDRS. And that would enable you to, while compromising perhaps on some of the access to modern market liquidity tools, you would, on the other side of that, guarantee yourself real ownership of the individual shares with the company and have a direct relationship with that company. In my mind, that comes with tons of great benefits, such as assertion of that you're able to get your vote not only cast but counted. Overvoting is a major problem, like an elephant in the room in the American markets, and that's something we can dig into. There's also opportunity to submit communications directly to the company. If you're holding through a broker in the legacy system, well, I call it legacy system. It's about 50 years old, but that's pretty legacy at this point. It's certainly incumbent. Maybe I'll say that.
Okay.
But if you're holding through that incumbent system, then the individual company does not know who you are. It's semi-anonymous, where all they see is that there's a bulk of shares held by CD & Co. So they don't know which brokers have what shares necessarily. They don't know who is invested in those brokers. So if you were to send a communication over, they would not be able to verify your ownership or be able to know if they need to respond to you or if they should take that in good faith, that communication. There's ways to get additional paperwork done so the broker can sign off on your ownership and verify it, but that can be difficult. If you want to communicate with your company, then direct registration is the right way to do it. Ultimately, it's in a nutshell, it's best for long-term investors who are specifically passionate about the companies they invest with, and who are not intending to move the money around all that much. Conversely, access to the incumbent system might be more important if you are someone who's more interested in day trading, playing off news in the short term, operating on margin as opposed to only dealing in settled cash. So there's pros and cons of always pros and cons.
Incredible, Chives. It sounds like the impact of these institutions has stuck with you since the Great Recession, if I'm hearing that right. Could you talk to me a little more on what that was like for you?
Well, sure. So I was still in high school at that time, and so and my father's a small business owner. My mom is a teacher, and what do people say? Salt of the earth, and that was just a difficult time. Not only I think for them in terms of what they were able to do in terms of their income, but for a lot of other people that I saw around me. I mean, there were folks that that lost homes and that were not able to continue living at near the standard that they had been. Like for myself, it's an old family home. Like my great grandfather, it was a house that he built, so that was okay. But the periphery around that, the small business lost a lot of its ability to provide, I guess maybe I'll say in that time, through no fault of anyone's except for the broader financial elite. What ended up happening as far as that experience was, I knew, I guess I knew first, right, that there were a lot of people that were suffering. There was a big change in what we, I guess, would have to eat. Like I love to cook. I also love to eat, and the sorts of meals that we had were pretty different for a year or two there, and for some time following. And I also had friends in the in my high school environment that were much more hard hit than I was. People that weren't able to keep living in the same place and needed to move in with family, and I mean, they were able to keep going to school, which is good. But I mean, the amount of uprooting that happened, and it definitely did create a lot of resentment, curiosity, certainly, but like in a from a different kind of motivation. And it took a long time to really understand. I mean, at this point, like I've seen The Big Short a bunch of times. I have a pretty good idea of what exactly happened, but I definitely did not at that time. And seeing, like that was, Obama was elected then, and initially, in some of the earlier debates, as I recall, there was some discussion about, more capitulation. You had Hillary Clinton saying, I went down to Wall Street and I told them to cut it out. I don't know if you remember that, John, but point being, not a lot really changed. I mean, no American banker went to jail, right? There, nothing, nothing meaningful, and even the regulatory regime did not, change in an effective way. At least moving forward into the modern era, we have not exactly the same problems, but many of the same types of problems.
Yeah, inspiring that your mom is a teacher, and interesting to hear. So with your dad's small business, do you think that was a big factor in later down the road leaning on small businesses, or how have you approached or gone into that particular crucial foundation of our economy?
Well, I would definitely say that, it was a business that he started. I mean, it's still going. I think it's 30, 35 years for him now, maybe a bit,
Wow. And he
maybe a bit
started on
more.
his own?
Started on his own in his own garage, and
Wow.
gradually expanded outwards over the decades where possible. Yeah, I mean, of course, that was the inspiration. I mean, that's the inciting incident, right? Seeing the sweat and tears and the hard work that goes into something of your own, and then also seeing the double-edged sword of it. There's a freedom in it, there's a freedom in being able to dictate for yourself things like operating hours, policies, rates, community goodwill, and involvement. But at the same time, um, when the shit hit the fan at times, right? The other side of that is that there's immense personal responsibility, and there needs to be people that are willing to put a pedal to the metal, as it were, whatever they need to do to keep things going. There are good times and there are bad times, and I think that we see so much monopolization in so many areas of our economy. We see very little in terms of, I guess, like the trust busting of 100 years ago is long gone. You've got, I know Microsoft buying Activision was huge. There was just another one that I was reading about, but I can't remember it now. Point being, we see so much of this stuff, and it's like a passing the buck of responsibility. You end up with less and less community engagement, less and less people thinking about their neighbor, because so many people are now working for these gigantic amorphous spectral beings that operate across state and nation lines that don't have any kind of visibility for their individual employees in the same way that the employees can't visualize the massive entity they're a part of. And it's a massive oppositional relationship, as opposed, when considering how a small business works, how a small business interacts with its community, and is loved in its community, or not. I mean, not every small business succeeds, obviously, but the point being, people have a passion to begin it. They've got some kind of, if it's an entrepreneurial spirit, or if it's a hobby that they're wanting to share with their community, or a service they're looking to provide. I think that's really terrific. And and I think of these larger employment structures as being more about the means to an end. You need to put bread on the table, so you're going to have a job, but it might not be speaking to you in the same way that I'm hoping that mom and pops who have some kind of driven passion in their local community, that they have. And in my experience, not only in my family, but in my dealings with small businesses in the areas that I live, that's exactly what I find. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I think it's so important to support those businesses. The broader economic framework makes it harder and harder for them to succeed. To say nothing of what they endured during the COVID years, but just in terms of being able to maintain, like good credit, or have access to loans for, possible growth, or even just, maintaining. Many businesses have good times of the year, bad times of the year. Like the area I live in now, this background is almost accurate. I live in Colorado now, and
Okay.
there's a lot more people in this area than at some parts of the year than others. But the small business needs to find a way to make that work. And thankfully, I think the state's pretty good about that. But the broader framework could be a lot better. Absolutely.
The broader framework around how they what do you mean?
I mean, in terms of providing support for small businesses, like in America in general. And I mean, that's something again where, if we had some kind of distributed ledger technology in more common use, then that's a great thing that can be helpful for that, because you don't need to worry about operating within these major businesses. Like every time I think about Visa and Discovery or whatever getting 2.5%, 3%, 4% if you're Amex percent on trades, it makes my blood boil every time I stop to think about it. Because what are they doing? What are they? Yeah, that's. I can't think about that. So it's frustrating to me, and I can understand moving away from cash. It's a more and more electronic society that we're living in, but there are major consequences to making those kind of moves without considering alternative structures.
Yeah, completely with you there, Chives. God, I remember looking over some financial statements from my parents' restaurant before it went bankrupt after the Great Recession. They closed it down, one of the two.
Oh, goodness.
And it was just looking at the line items for like how many tens of thousands they spent on credit card processing fees.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't know about that. So you're familiar then with how this can impact.
It sounds like you have a pretty extensive experience with small businesses. Have you was that mostly through your going to trying to get, what was the inspiration behind bringing those Bitcoin payments to those small businesses early on? Was it advocacy? Was it helping the community? What was the story there, Chives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit of those two columns mostly. I mean, really, it sounds like your folks yeah, knew for it sounds like your folks, they knew firsthand what a glut that can be on an income, on a bottom line, and that's true for any kind of business. I mean, especially one with repeated kind of small volume customers. Like a restaurant is a perfect example, because they have such turnover. They're operating at, they're doing so many $20 transactions in a day, or less, back at that time, and it's ends up hitting them even harder because they've got such high operating costs to maintain that volume. I mean, yeah, it's the same percentage that you're paying out to the credit card companies, but it's different if you're making, one purchase a month or whatever, or one purchase, you know what I mean? It's different with a restaurant. So anyways, that's exactly those kind of advocacy metrics were what I was really trying to help with. Talking to folks like, hey, there's a lot of kids around here. It's a college town. You could perhaps engage better with your clientele. You could offer like a 1% discount, and that's something, and still walk away with extra. The operating cost is basically nil. You just need to develop a familiarity with the technology, and this is long before like any kind of tax implication was really legally developed in the code. So for anyone who's like, how could you do that? This was a different time. But yeah, I mean, it just was trying to show people that there was an alternative, and that there was a vacuum here that they could choose to take advantage of if they wanted to. And yeah, I was like, even if a very small percentage of your clientele use it, at least you're by supporting it, you're providing people to learn about it, become curious, maybe get involved themselves, and everyone is able to save a little bit, keep things within this local community here, and keep going in that direction. Again, I mean, I think I was a bit just too early. There was a couple of businesses that bit, a couple of friends of mine or other people that found it attractive. By far, the people who found it most valuable were the ones that were otherwise using Western Union. But even then, it was just maybe like a dozen people that I was able to encourage and convince. So, I don't mean to overstate the success of my efforts at that time, but it was absolutely helpful for me as someone that who eventually would become, more of uh, what's the word for it? Someone who's consistently trying to speak out and provide educational resources on a different type of self-custody, which, with that direct registration that we touched on, which, these days is what I spend most of my efforts on.
Yeah, Chives, I think you certainly got a very impressive background there, having gotten in front of the chair of the SEC, including bringing extensive documentation to him on the importance of direct registration. What was the journey like for you? I guess sort of you started your advocacy efforts was bringing this adoption of new payments technology. How do you go from that to now? Was it mixing in with what you knew? What's the story? How do you go from that to where you are today?
Well, I think the biggest connective tissue is this idea of the self custody, because at the end of the day, the thing that makes the distributed ledger different, right, is that you're owning the coins or tokens or money or whatever that are on it, and so you don't need to operate within any of these legacy frameworks if you want to transact. It's your free right to do so, and I'm a big I suppose I've got some libertarian leanings as far as that's concerned, because I think very much that it's important for anyone who has, has traded their labor equity for some kind of more liquid monetary equity, that they maintain the right to not only have that, but to use it how they see fit in their community. And so when the GameStop buy button was turned off, and that was really offensive to me. I was not involved with GameStop at the time of the buy button being turned off at all. I'd heard a little about it, but not really dove into it at all. But then once that happened, it was a absolutely inciting incident, like a great fire was lit, because I had not realized that was an option they had. Um, no one really did, because it had not really been done on this kind of scale before, and so it that's what drove me to learn that, when you are buying through the broker, that you don't have the custody of the shares. I didn't know that before this incident, and so it was like, okay, well, they can only do this because it's theirs to control. So what recourse does the investor have? Is does that mean the stock market is just never going to be custodially available to an individual retail shareholder, or what can be done there? And so very thankfully, in the months following that, through community research online, I can't pretend to have discovered any of this myself initially, but the direct registration system became something that was discussed more and more, and we wanted to, I wanted to be a person that was spreading the word about that as much as possible, because there was a lot of consternation and suspicion about transitioning to this kind of system. There online in these spaces, people wanting to, not understanding why staying with the broker was an ownership. It took a long time to get that message across, but I was quite tenacious in the early days, and I think probably the experience that I had trying to explain the distinction of Bitcoin to folks that were used to the legacy system, it's kind of the same idea. You can take these custodial steps to transfer your equity into a place where you have total control over it. And so looking at it that way, it's the same ethos. So from that point, I guess had become noticed, in the community as someone who was trying to constantly talk about this stuff, and initially there were a few folks that had been. There's another website called drsgme.org, which is specifically focused on the direct registration of GameStop, since that was the community which was most curious about it, most involved with it. And so the guys who started that website, or rather, when they had the idea for that website, they were like, okay, we need some people to to work with us on this and develop the content and spread the word. And so I was one of the people they reached out to. So I was involved with that. And then it became very quickly apparent to me that it's not some isolated incident. Even if GameStop retail investors have secured ownership and self-custody of their shares, that is, one less than 1/10,000th of the, there's so many more companies out there and so many more investors who need to learn about their option for direct registration. So that was, we started working on WhyDRS.org, which launched in February of last year. Actually, the 1-year anniversary of WhyDRS was yesterday at the time of this recording.
Wow.
So that's a fun one. But you mentioned that I had the opportunity to speak with Chairman Gensler, and that was an incredible opportunity. I still cannot believe that happened. That happened also just about 1 year ago, and it came about because there's another advocacy group that kind of started up from the GameStop community called We the Investors. That's headed by Dave Lauer and some other folks. Dave Lauer is a ex-hedge fund employee who has kind of turned more to the educational advocacy side, which is great. And we're on friendly terms with them. And when they had petitioned Congress.
Let's see where that one goes. There we go.
Don't know why it keeps kicking me out. So they had petitioned Congress and got an initial sit down with Gary Gensler in late 2021, and then 2022. Yeah, boy. Yeah, I think 2022. Anyways, so one of the things they asked Chairman Gensler about was DRS, but it was still pretty early on at that time, and he said, "Oh well, I need to learn more about it, but let's talk again in the future." And so when it came time to have that follow-up meeting with Chairman Gensler, that they were able to secure through their advocacy work in Congress and in Washington, which is incredible. They're doing a great job. Then they decided to approach myself and our team to kind of come on, develop an educational resource. So we've got a 20-page informational packet about direct registration, some of the benefits, some of the cons, and some of the historical examples of when these things have been relevant. And then we had the opportunity to chat with him. So that was cool. But it was just a conversation. There's still a lot more of the needle to move. And I certainly love being able to keep working on WhyDRS and eventually provide a ownership framework and instructional guide for. Our goal is to have it basically where you can select your ticker, select your broker, and be generated an exact guide as far as what steps you can take, what fees to expect, how long it should take, all sorts of that kind of information, so that any investor can seek direct registration, while at the same time being a general resource for, what is it, why is it important, et cetera, so people can make an educated decision, because of course it's an individual decision.
Certainly Chives. And are there normally broker fees to enter the direct registration system?
Yeah, I would say normally. Yeah, I mean, more brokers have some kind of fee than do not, which is unfortunate, but in the context, it makes some sense. So for some background there, there is there's no regulatory framework as far as how long a DRS transfer can take, or if there are any fees attached. With something like ACAT, which is like the broker to broker transfer system, that needs to be completed in 3 trading days. It is not going to cost the individual investor anything if they're staying within the broker system. With DRS, it's much more piecemeal. Individual brokers are choosing their own path, and often what we've found is that the further steps removed a broker is from their clearinghouse, the more likely it is that they're going to charge investors who want to get a DRS transfer done, which makes some sense because they are going through a lot of effort at that point and want to get some recoupment. In addition to the concept that once shares are in, they've gone through DRS, they're in the investor's name rather than being held with the broker, that has limited the broker's ability to make any kind of money on those shares. There's plenty of suspicion gets thrown around where even if you don't have a margin account, shares can still be used for lending, et cetera, et cetera. And naturally, if the shares are not in the broker system, they're not available as a source of profit. They also may not have you as a client anymore. So there's tons of reasons why they just might not be interested in having an easy, cheap pathway for direct registration. But there does need to be a pathway, at least that part's regulated. So there is going to be a way to do it, even if it involves transferring to a different broker first.
Wow. So it sounds like it's a very hazy market where there's a lot of nuance to it because it's not very well defined for those investors to figure the process out. And that could be influenced, if I'm hearing right, by the partners that a broker works with. Is that right? How would you describe that custody structure?
Well, we touched on it a bit earlier. If I think what you're asking, where the DTC has ownership and the brokers are members of the DTC and maintain ledgers through there to instruct themselves on what kind of ownership their clients have and what they have through that system. One thing that I should mention, just to be more clear, is that DRS is a DTC service. It's essentially a electronic transmissal of shares from their centralized system towards the what are called transfer agents. And I hope any of your listeners know about transfer agents. But transfer agents are contracted by individual companies to also track ownership ledgers. And so the DRS is the system by which they transfer between these different, I guess we'll call them like hierarchies. And so you'd asked about brokers and broker partners. So what I was talking about with clearinghouses was although all brokers, they don't all need to be directly members with DTC, but they do need to have a partner who is. So a lot of the time there are, for example, this is an easy example, there are many international brokers that do allow trading in American stocks. And the way they do this is by having a domestic partner that is going to handle all of their trades. Whatever, like if you're a German investor wanting to get involved in an American company, then very likely your broker is going to, your partner is partnered up with an American broker, and then that American broker is going to help to facilitate trade. It's what I can say about that is that it can introduce its own set of difficulties, certainly. But ultimately, investors have the ability to involve themselves with these companies. But the brokers that they're dealing with internationally, most of them have no ability to DRS because they're not involved in the DTC system directly. They need to go through that middleman, that sponsoring broker partner, in order to access it. And so the largest fees that we see in general come from that kind of structure. And the more steps that you add in the chain of share entitlement custody, as it were, the more of a fee is likely to be expected, just as a general rule. And again, that's sensible enough.
Yeah. A lot of people involved there. It sounds like you've looked very extensively into this, and given that background, now that we have with GameStop, I think we can all agree one of the largest movements of investors en masse going toward the DRS system, despite these costs. What do you think leads them to make that investment to have shares on their own name rather than go through the incumbent? Some say maybe it's easier on the interface, on getting the account set up, on managing it. What do you think inspires them to go towards this movement, Chives?
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to speak to that. I want to mention first, you said that GameStop's kind of an unique, or maybe the best example of retail's developing an interest in DRS, and that is very, very true. At this point, retail owns about 25% of the company directly on the issuer ledger. That is a massive percentage, and most companies don't disclose DRS ownership, but that's because they have not had any reason to. Very few investors hold that way, and they would not have been aware that investors were interested in knowing. Investors did not know they were interested in knowing either until quite recently. So that is another project that we're undergoing, trying to get more issuers to disclose their DRS ownership as they are able to do, should they choose. But to answer your question, I had mentioned earlier that WhyDRS informational packet that we provided to the SEC, and that did detail a lot of the broader strokes benefits that exist for direct registration. I alluded to some earlier, the guarantee of votes being counted, or being able to directly communicate with the board of directors, or through the company secretary, or submit shareholder proposals, to be able to receive dividends as opposed to cash in lieu of dividends, which is a more tax advantageous distribution for the retail investor should they be DRS. But truth be told,
What a time for that to cut out.
But truth be told, I don't think any of those are actually the main driving factor for investors that are DRSing. But the reason I bring them up first, and why I always rally on those, is because they're factual, demonstrable items that have been the center of study for many years. Like, especially the overvoting issue is a massive problem, and one that DRS can help to resolve. But a lot of folks involved, I think, in GameStop as longs are they believe, first off, that there are more trading shares in the market than were initially issued by GameStop. Now, this is not by itself unusual. It's actually quite common for there to be more trading shares in the market than were initially issued by the company. That can happen for a variety of reasons, but the most common one is just with a short sale, because it can create it can essentially add, if you short sell something, you're adding one to the effective trading float of a share of a stock, even though it has not been issued by the company. So that by itself is not unusual. And personally, I would not even say that by itself that's even a problem. I view both longs and shorts as two halves of eventually reaching some kind of price capitulation, assuming a free market where these different trades impact the price, which is a different conversation. But point being, these long investors feel that not only is that kind of activity happening, but it is happening egregiously, and that there is a massive amount of extra shares trading in the market beyond that issued amount. And there are a variety of reasons to think this. I would say there's quite a lot of circumstantial evidence, but I think, as we went over closer to the beginning of the call, due to a variety of different informational resources being lacking for the retail side, and things like short interests for firms often being self-reported, there's a lot of different factors that go into this, where although there could be a lot of smoke, it's not necessarily definitive. So there's a theory to this. But at the end of the day, if right, so this is something that's not happened before, but if a public company were to have, let's say, all of its outstanding shares owned on the issuer ledger, in GameStop case, that's about 305 million. So let's say there's 305 million shares owned by retail on this issuer ledger, then if there were, all of these extra shares that are in the trading market, so that would mean there's a whole lot of non-zero accounts in brokers, both domestic and international, even after those final shares are registered with the company directly. And there's a big question about what would happen then, because at that point, it would be plain to see that all of those shares are not backed with anything meaningful, and it would sort of rip the wool off as far as the whole idea of share entitlement versus share ownership. As to what happens then, I mean, I think that is to be determined, but I think a lot of folks are quite curious about what might happen, and so are interested to see that, and so they're taking the steps to seek ownership, in part because it may eventually force some kind of systemic reckoning, as it were. So I think that remains to be seen. I think a lot of the evidence is quite convincing that there's definitely something fishy there for sure. And either way, I would encourage people to seek direct ownership for whatever reason speaks to them. So I think that's important to mention as well. So it's hard. I don't want to speak for any of the millions of investors out there. Well, I don't want to say millions. There's 200,000 registered owners or so with the company. Who knows how many hold through brokers? We certainly don't know. But I don't want to speak for all of them, but I would estimate that a lot are interested for those reasons. And then, of course, the security and voting and these other things are, of course, quite important as well.
Wow, a lot of interesting nuances there, and certainly worth anyone listening who hasn't to explore that information packet that goes into the macro trends that are affected by this crucial topic. If is there anything else you want to add into on that? I know we're, as much as you're generous to keep sharing with us.
Well, I guess for me, I want to make sure that people know that the whole concept of ownership is, I think it's more important to a lot of folks than they even realize. I think we're undergoing a real crisis of ownership in our society in general. And if you look at housing prices as opposed to how many people have to rent their homes, if you look at how many people have to get streaming services, you can't get DVDs anymore, right? Like you're renting your content. If you're buying your video games on Steam, you don't necessarily own that. It's connected to your account, which could be rescinded by the centralized company at any time. There's not a protective element in terms of actual ownership in so many aspects of our society, and for me, it's quite alarming. And I think it's a progression that's been going on for quite some years. And naturally, thinking at it from a profit perspective, a lot of these broader companies, they prefer being able to distribute software versions of their games, or being able to stream content. You save so much on physical production and distribution, but those savings don't get passed on to the consumer either. And there's not, I think there's a missing comprehensive element of that problem, of that transition in the consumer economy that I just wanted to mention here and try to get some people thinking about.
That's so interesting. So if I'm here, right, the consumer ends up on the short end of the stick when something like a Valve rescinding their account. What would that look like, or how have you seen things like that?
I mean, if you were to, break their terms of service or something like that, I mean, I don't want to throw Valve under the bus specifically. I think I've seen more of this from Blizzard, but Valve can do it too. I mean, it's something that they have the ability to do. And there's not, to my knowledge, and I love to be shown otherwise, but the legal regulatory framework indicating that individuals who do purchase a given service or a given item or access to an IP or whatever it is can maintain that, or if there is a statute on it, that is made very clear at the time of purchase. I don't think that, in my perception, is that that it's not that way today. And so with these different online games platforms, for example, I think about there's GOG, which has a lot of DRM free distributions, which I know it's a lot of acronyms, but point being, something like Steam, right? You mentioned Valve, I mentioned Valve. When you buy a game through that platform, you can only launch it through their launcher, right? They want you to always be routed through their service. With some other platforms, they provide you with the raw files, the executable, that you could then put on a flash drive. And then, if you were so inclined, you could make 10,000 copies of that, hand it out to everyone you've ever met in your life, and all for the price of one license to the game. But I mean, and some are going to view that as like an opportunity for abuse or some kind of big problem. But I don't know. I don't quite see it that way. I think people who are on it, like, I choose to believe that people who are interested to support a given project, be it recreational, artistic, community-based, broader than that, they're going to seek to support that. And so I don't think that that's near as big a concern. If someone's going to be pirating your game or borrowing, in those cases, I don't think that's a real sale that you're losing anyway. I think that I think companies would be well suited to embrace consumer goodwill and provide these things. But the problem is, at least in terms of games or in terms of streaming media, because of the monopolization in our entertainment industries and otherwise, it's very difficult to expose yourself to the broader consumer framework without capitulating creatively to one of these centralized entities and putting yourself and your IP and your creation through their platform.
Wow. So it sounds like in the information space and with this digital content, if I'm hearing right, the idea is that the free distribution and sharing can actually be a benefit to these companies more than anything else.
I would argue that, but I'm just some guy.
Yeah. Have you seen that, Chives?
In terms of some companies doing that? Well, yeah, sure. What about the open source space? There's tons of incredible development going on there. I love open source technology in general. And as far as, more, what's the word? Like, people trying to sell IPs directly, I mean, it's hard for these, as I mentioned, it's hard to go through and actually gain access to the broader online framework without going through these centralized companies. But there's a lot of individual support that goes on. I mean, with the rise of, I guess I'll call services like, I'd say services like Patreon, but ultimately that's just another company. What I'd like to see is crypto stepping in and providing the peer-to-peer support of these projects. But I think that's something where it's just taking some time. And then as far as, again, the open source projects or anytime someone is freely distributing something, I think that not only do you get to gain access to a wider market, but the familiarity in the consumer base that comes from that is very valuable. But again, it also does represent a lot of goodwill. People are never going to feel slighted if they're not happy with your project or if it doesn't fit their exact specification, if they are not out anything for it. And for the people that are in something for the love of doing it, for the passion of doing it, for providing this thing, whatever it is, I tend to believe, and this could be naive, but that there's enough of a matching between the folks that want to create X, right, and then the ones that want to support X. And if we can properly match these people up without the lecherous influence of centralizing body, then I think that people can be creative and people can be supported, and it can all operate seamlessly through this modern electronic, peer-to-peer age.
Wow, Chives. It sounds like a lot of thought has gone into that, and experience here certainly.
Well, who knows? Who knows how much of that is possible or fruitful? But at the end of the day, I mean, everyone's going to have to seek out what matters for them, and what matters to me these days is helping people learn about direct registration.
Of course. And on that note, where can listeners go to learn more about direct registration, Chives?
Well, probably the best place would be WhyDRS.org. That's WHYDRS.org. Or rewind the video so you can see John's coffee cup. You can also, we have a podcast ourselves that John's stopped by before on called Taking Stock. So maybe we put a link in the link somewhere. And I'm on Twitter, but I don't use it much. Like, it's the first time I've ever dropped my Twitter, but it's how to Chives, to the number. So HOW2 Chives. I'm trying to be more active on there, do more conversations like this one. And DMs are open. If you have any questions about anything, let me know.
Well, thanks so much for sharing, Chives. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, John. Love the opportunity to chat. Covered a lot of different ground. Don't know if that's what you had in mind, but definitely enjoy the opportunity and love what you're doing too. I wish we'd talked more about block transfer, but I guess, again, your audience probably already knows.
Well, certainly. It sounds like you've really gone from starting off in the grassroots and entering. And might I ask, I mean, how many of those $200 Bitcoins do we still have lying around?
Oh, not nearly as many as might have been helpful. I, for ideological reasons, dispersed the vast majority of them in 2017 to, with the hard fork, bought mostly Bitcoin Cash instead. Wanted to vote with my wallet, even though part of me knew, I think, that the side the banking establishment was on was probably going to be more economically fruitful. I still wanted to vote with my heart instead.
The side the banking establishment was on?
Oh, well, that's a whole other topic. But I would say that they've through encouraging moving settlement onto a secondary layer, that the BTC legacy chain is something that the banking establishment has kind of thrown their hat in with. And I mean, that was years ago. I mean, now today we've got these Bitcoin ETFs that are basically individuals trading derivatives of the crypto instead of embracing the reality of being able to own self-custodially on the blockchain, which is bastardization of Satoshi's original vision in my eyes.
I'm with you there, Chives. And I know we've been going on for a bit now. I remember I was on Taking Stock for over 2 hours just because it's very interesting and very important. I've cleared out my schedule after this. If you would like to, might we dive into that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm down.
So, how did you learn about Bitcoin?
Oh, I guess I just saw it mentioned online somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, something. And okay. And was it just kind of the white paper that set you off on that journey?
Oh yeah, yeah. Heard about it. There was some really cool website that I'd found that had the white paper on there, and it took me, I read it, didn't really sink in, then like a couple weeks later, I think I went back to it, read it again, and then eventually it clicked, and started me off. And once it did click, there was it wasn't getting unclicked.
Wow. And so that was early in the whole adoption cycle. And it sounds like you really lived through. Were you investing in any equities at the time, or were you? I know you pulled out the seed funds. Was that mostly going into to your interest, education, crypto? What was that like?
Oh yeah, and I was not really involved with traditional equities at that time. It was this was back when like local bitcoins was a thing
Yeah.
that was just getting started up. Like I remember when that kind of launched, and so I would you know uh, there was a Starbucks like right across state lines that I would go and meet people at because I was paranoid. I didn't want to do it too close to home, so I would actually drive a bit of a distance to meet people to trade cash to transfer coins to me. I mean, this is ancient
Oh
history
wow.
now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this
What
is
did
before Coinbase or whatever, you know. What were you gonna say, John?
afraid to do it near where you really lived?
Well, I just I don't know. I think I was just um this is before, right? So when I was first getting involved, I was like, oh, this is something where I kind of want to preserve the anonymity of it as much as I can. And then later I realized, well, not only do I want to spread this word to other people, but I can just have another wallet. Like there's no need for like no one needs to know that I could just have multiple wallets. But I realized I could have multiple wallets, and if one of them was just a cold storage wallet that's only receiving, then that's great, and it doesn't need to impact the rest of my life at all. So once I, learned a little bit more, developed that additional familiarity, and decided that I wanted to start to try to get more people to understand what was going on, then then it was just a matter of matter of doing that.
Certainly. So it sounds like you've been involved with self-custody since almost the start.
Well, I mean, I guess you might look at it that way if you think of invention of Bitcoin as the start. Um, I mean, remember that before the DTC, the norm for stocks was self-custody also, where you'd keep your own certificates and stuff like that. But then that stopped being the norm in 1973. So, but yeah, I mean, since that 2012, 13, 14 era, I mean, it's been a pretty big part of my life. Yeah.
And would you say that that pattern of starting with self-custody and then going to a custodian in the traditional stock space has paralleled to now with the L2s and the custodians in the crypto space?
I'm not 100%. Could you ask that question a different way?
Sure. So what was the it sounds like that the Bitcoin Cash fork was a big turning point for you, if I'm hearing
Oh,
that right.
yeah.
And was it because, if I'm getting this right, of the influence and principles of the legacy banking establishment for trying to build on top of the base chain and actually hold the assets for you?
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways. So that's definitely a way that I might phrase it. I guess to give a bit more context, I think a lot of folks today, with the widespread popularity and interest that Bitcoin has, a lot of people don't necessarily know all that much about the hard fork. So just in brief, um, initially, uh, Bitcoin would have transact. Well, how far back do we want to go? The way a blockchain works is there. uh, every so often, transactions are bundled together into blocks and they get spliced onto the chain, and the chain goes on. And that's how transactions are verified by the system. Okay. Um, when Bitcoin was starting up, there were never enough transactions to fill this block. It was always going to, every 10 minutes, the transactions were going to fire. But the block size does have a high end. Eventually, there's enough transactional data that it's not able to fit all into the same block, and then maybe it gets queued up or whatever it is. The way that the system was originally designed is that you could have an additional miner's fee. Miners being the ones who are searching for these blocks to validate transactions. Maybe I went too far back, but the point being, you could influence a bit the speed of transaction in these heavier traffic times. Generally speaking, this is how blockchains still work today. The conversation around the leading into 2017 with the idea of Bitcoin Cash, and then what eventually turned into the hard fork, was multiple different perspectives about how to solve this problem, where not every transaction anymore is going to be able to be cleared in the same time frame, and ease of transaction was, one of the major ideas of the technology. So the Bitcoin Cash perspective was that a logical solution would just be to increase the block size and to allow more transactions, per block, and that way you could maintain the same, throughput of actual transactions being of blocks being cleared, but vastly increase potentially the amount of transactions within those blocks. So that was the side of the argument that I came down on. The main theory against was that, for as large as the block size would get, that means that the chain itself is getting larger and larger too, and it makes it more and more difficult for individuals to support what are called nodes. These are basically like individual iterations of the blockchain. It's what creates the distributed consensus. So, John, let me know if I'm being too in the weeds about it, but the point being, the concern was that larger block size would make it too difficult for an effective, large amount of people to support the network through these nodes because of the cost of additional data and so on. My perspective is and was that data is cheap enough for this not to be a major concern. So conversely, then, the legacy Bitcoin side is the one that said, okay, rather than increasing block size, to get more transactions through, we're going to introduce a settlement layer, level 2. And this, John, you alluded to this, must be familiar yourself, but essentially the idea would be, on the settlement layer, you have network participants that are signing up to what became to be called the Lightning Network, that would be able to transact in bundles of transactions, and then kind of write those bundles to the main chain instead. So it'd be another way of outsourcing the same bundle of transactions. So you could still get the same growth that you wanted, but now there's this additional settlement layer where you have these, what ended up being, and don't get me wrong, there are individuals who have presence on the Lightning Network, but there are also a lot of larger entities also that, in my view, and this was my major concern back then, and to some degree is still my major concern now, that because there's this introduction of a secondary settlement layer, there's more of a hierarchy in who decides what transactions can go through. And the appealing part of the technology for me, right up there with self-custody, derived from that is the peer-to-peer freedom of individuals to transact with each other. And if the network itself is creating roadblocks in who can transact, I have a major problem with that.
If the network's creating roadblocks.
Yeah, but by which I mean, if the network structure, through has compromised on some of that ease of transaction, I think that compromise isn't worth it. But that was the major debate at that time, and certainly a lot of individuals came down on both sides. And even today, I think there's probably not as much academic interest in the conversation as there should have been. But the nice thing is that even despite despite it going that way, the beauty of a hard fork is that both coins exist today. There is legacy Bitcoin BTC. There is Bitcoin Cash BCH that does have the larger block sizes that I was describing, and that continues to be adopted by people in the third world for use cases like what I was describing, to circumvent vultures like Western Union, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's still happening regardless of the major banking interest and investment interest going to the legacy coin. That's not, the end of the world necessarily, because it doesn't matter. If you need to transfer $100 USD, the equivalent of it, to your family in Nigeria, it does not matter if you're moving, 0.001 BCH or 10,000 BCH. Either way, it'll get there and they can liquidate it and they'll have what they need. So it's not really important what the trading value is. It's more important that the framework allows for permissionless, feeless, instant transaction anywhere in the world between anyone, and that's where the value comes from, in my eyes.
Certainly with you there, Chives, and what a great way to put it and succinctly show everyone that. What was your experience with it? How did you learn about self-custody? I'm assuming through Bitcoin.
Absolutely through Bitcoin. It made me realize that I guess what I'll say is I had a suspicion beforehand. We talked a bit about 2008 and the history of financial crises. And so already that there's something screwy going on, right? Okay, if everyone has their money in the bank, but like the bank, what happens exactly? They lost it? They didn't have it? Where'd it go? What happened? So that's weird. And then, then with Bitcoin and the concept, it kind of put face to name. It put words to the idea about, okay, if this is self-custody, then this other stuff isn't. This is all something else. And that inciting incident was super important to frame what would develop into a better understanding. And things have just kind of trended in that direction in the legacy establishment. Like we're about a month away, just as an aside, where we're a month away from the 4-year anniversary of there being a 0% reserve requirement in America's banks, which means that what is a reserve requirement? It's when the bank does not need to keep any of its money in its own coffers, meaning all the money its clients have provided it. It is able to use all of that for facilitating lending, doling out loans or making investments, things like that. A lot of people may have heard the phrase, fractional reserve lending as like an issue with the legacy system, and that is that idea where okay, if you've got money in the vault and someone needs to borrow money, for next week, it's unlikely anyone's going to need all the money in the vault before next week, so you can lend out a little bit of that, get a little bit of interest back, use that to keep the lights on or keep the security guard paid, whatever it is. So there's applications for that, but these days it's not a fraction and it's not a reserve. They're able to use 100% of that bulk, and it's coming up on 4 years, as I said, which is just
Wow.
every time I think about that is incredible to me.
That is mind-blowing, Chives. So it sounds like outside of capital ratios, it's almost like what's happening with these banks and the fundings there's just not a lot of oversight and control over, just like with the shares at DTC.
Yeah, ultimately, I would agree with that. I would like to see more transparency, and then regulation is one route, but transparency I feel like would be even better, because then the public could just self-assess which banks are being the most what's the word, irresponsible, maybe. That would be really appealing to me. The DTC, funnily enough, might even be a step above that, because they're almost above the reproach of regulation. They're actually what is known as a self-regulating organization, where they kind of operate under their own framework and almost in parallel to the regulatory bodies or the elected authority that exist in the country. So the banks aren't quite on that level, almost, with things like regulatory capture, but I would almost give the nod to I think I'd give the nod to the DTC as being more problematic in this regard.
Wow. Totally out. So it sounds like totally outside the system and on rogue almost, one might think.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if it were just that, but they are the system,
Oh,
you know? So it's yeah, they're outside of the regulatory regime, but at the same time, they are the monopolistic representation of, if you want to trade in the modern financial market, then you have to go through them pretty much.
hmm. And so contrasting that with the understanding you have of this new blockchain technology, do you think there's a way we could displace that incumbent system?
Yes, I do. And that is where, in a lot of parts where you come in, John. I really love what you're doing over there. Love the whole concept of taking. So it's a combination of everything we've talked about, taking the shares out of the establishment system and bringing them to the company's books, so that although you're relinquishing some ability to trade easily, you're removing yourself and your equity from this legacy system. Okay. But then what does blockchain provide for us if not a way to correlate that self-custody with access to a worldwide 24/7 custodial framework for trade, where people, you can't scam, you can't, I mean, you can, well, I don't want to, word like scam has a lot of baggage, but what I mean is that I can't sell you something if I don't have it on the blockchain without making it quite clear, like, okay, if it's a shorts contract or, a flat sale, whatever it is, it's going to be quite apparent not only to you and to me, but to anyone else who inspects the public history of transactions. And so there's a massive amount of improved transparency, not only for observers, but for all the market participants as well, which I expect would lead to an absolute renaissance when it comes to being able to properly see the economic impact or viability of various investments, and helping to protect people from the risks taken by influential market incumbents.
Wow, it sounds like you've done a lot of processing on those insights.
You as well, I'm sure.
Yes, my gosh, a renaissance, you think?
Yeah, if that word's probably not strong enough.
And is that based off your understanding of the whole Web3 space? Help me understand a little bit more. Were you sort of a Bitcoin maximalist up until the split, or have you been dabbling around the whole sector? What's that look like, Chives?
Well, I guess you could have called me a maximalist up until the split, sure.
Okay.
As far as, I mean, I think that's a bit of a different conversation than like the Web 2, Web 3. To talk about that briefly, right? The way I think about it is, your Web 1 was like IRC chats, like almost like direct conversations. Web 2 was when those conversations started to get centralized into massive companies that would, I mean, it was a long process, but essentially we've transitioned from, I remember 25 years ago now, geez, when first getting the dial-up computer and, going on websites that were individually hosted by hobbyists. And it's not as if you'd like, this is way before YouTube, so like there were, I'll age myself. There's like E-Bombs World, Albino Black Sheep. There are tons of these websites that were, different media or art animations, things like that. There were tons of them. Those two were two of the bigger ones, but there were so many small ones. These days, there's YouTube, right? And that's the transition into Web 2, where there's a bunch of centralized for-profit entities that are essentially throttling ability for creators to effectively communicate with their prospective audiences, because it's sort of like what we were talking about earlier. If you want to create something online, sure, it's easy to, the barrier to entry has never been lower. as far as making a YouTube video or posting on TikTok or whatever it is. Phones have cameras in them. It's very easy. The downside, though, is that you are being forced to.
It's an interesting point. I do appreciate the barrier part, because the lowering the barriers.
Side, though, is that you're being forced to use that central platform, and that means following along with whatever their terms of service are, whatever their whatever kind of content that they allow or want to promote. That means the advertisers that they're contracting with are going to be exposed to your audience, and you don't get much of a say in this. So anyways, that's kind of the Web 2 ecosystem. Now, finally, we get to this transition into what might be called a Web 3 ecosystem, where rather than needing to go through these central bodies, more and more individuals are going to take this idea of like a distributed community concept, like similar to what blockchain offers, and do that on the internet as well. And that's where other coins like Ethereum and all of the many tokens that are built on that can come into play, where it allows for individuals to do things like, if there's a website that is going to be pairing up with a wallet to make sure that individuals can go on the website and access certain content based on whatever's in their wallet, in terms of like some kind of token or NFT or something like that, being able to play a game and be awarded similar tokens through that game. Just a distribution of the actual community element away from these centralized bodies, because again, the barrier to entry as far as these crypto coins and tokens is very, very low. If you wanted to, there's a coding element involved, like if you wanted to be an architect, but in terms of being a participant, it's very low. And I'm sure that I think we're in the very early stages of this, but I'm anticipating a lot of success in it once the user interface element has been more improved, to where people are not even necessarily realizing that they are engaging with this technology. It's just operating under the hood. You don't need to know how an internal combustion engine works to drive a car, right? So same kind of concept there. All this being said, it's going to be a transition period for sure, because these incumbents in the space, like YouTube or Facebook or any of these tech giants, the reason their communities are so big is because on the internet, people are going to go where the community is. If if people have new content, it's very difficult to engage with the content with no audience, and most are consumers, not creators, on the online, and so that creates this monopolization. But I anticipate that, although there's no way to know how long it'll take, I view it as kind of like a one-way slide towards this new technological interface.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Never heard that.
I went all over the place with the answer. I hope that slightly
That's
helped.
very interesting. One-way slide.
I think so. Just might take a few years, maybe decades, something. But I think so.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your insights today, Chives. It's so interesting. Do you have any, if someone, any advice you'd give to someone who's just starting their investment journey? Is there some secret altcoin no one knows about for them?
No. What I would encourage is to, before getting too excited or too involved, just try to familiarize yourself with not only the item that you have some curiosity about, but the framework in which it operates. Take a look at, if there's some given company where you wanted to get involved with a security, or some given coin or token. Try to look at where its space in the market is and what it's providing. For securities, if something is there's going to be a lot of study on that already, but you can do a lot of reading and make sure that something makes sense for you. Don't invest based on the, like gotcha journalism or like strong buzzwords or the promise of quick return. I'm reminded of Warren Buffett, time in the market beats timing the market. That's a classic. And, invest with conviction and be patient. As far as coins and tokens are kind of a whole other ball game. With a company, you can look at fundamentals, you can look at things like profitability or free cash flow, and these are worthwhile items to learn about should you choose to become an investor, just so that you can properly evaluate. When it comes to coins and tokens, not only is there a lot less disclosure necessarily that's required, but often these tokens just have less utility to begin with. They're not, they're operating off of market sentiment in most cases. We're still very early on in this technology in terms of distributed ledger and all these crypto coins, and very, very few of them have actual intrinsic market impact in terms of what they're accomplishing in the space or pushing community forward. So I'd encourage extreme caution before getting involved in anything niche, because truthfully, if it's not like something with a patent that is doing something actually new, it's unlikely that who knows? But I would say to exercise extreme caution, because a lot of these quick movements are more about market sentiment or community sentiment or excitement and human emotion than they are about anything else.
Spoken with true wisdom, Chives. Well, thanks again for being on. Is there anything you want to leave us with here? We learned so much.
Well, it was a good conversation. I obviously did most of the talking there, but certainly anyone does have any follow-up thoughts, would certainly appreciate hearing them. And we're in the beginning. This is a revolutionary time in terms of investor advocacy and grasping onto these ownership rights in a way that is wholly new since the advent of the DTC. As I've said, although we were able to speak broadly on a variety of other topics, that's where my heart and soul is these days. And so I would absolutely encourage, if there is a company that your family, someone that you know and care about, that they care about, that they invest with, then make sure to discuss with them, that then maybe they would prefer to, if they're going to be holding it anyways, to have a more direct relationship with that company. I'm sure that, if your loved one really enjoys, you name the company, right? But if they've been invested in them for 30 years, maybe the company would like to know who they are. Maybe they'd like to hear from them. That would be, I'm sure, a beautiful thing. And I've done a lot of outreach now to publicly traded companies. These issuers are learning about all of this, incredibly enough, right alongside us, because DRS is still so niche and holding directly with the company is so niche. But the ones that we have spoke with are, interested to learn. They're excited about the idea of developing a direct relationship with their investors. And it's something that's a lot more common in other countries. Here, I'll just go on a quick tangent real quick where I'll mention that in France, they have so much friendliness to direct registered holders where they will, not only do you get like a 10% discount off at if you're buying in stores with some places, but you get a bonus percentage to your dividends. You get access to like special meetings, and you can go to interact with the company representatives in ways where beneficial holders through the legacy system cannot, or for only direct holders. That sort of benefit is not very common in America yet. But I will be absolutely trying to make some companies recognize the value in embracing their long-term investor base, and the value that it can bring not only to the community goodwill in terms of recurrent familial investments in companies over time. But as far as the evaluation of a stock, I mean, if you were told, well, this company, nobody has the passion in the company to own directly, and in this company, they've got 10% ownership of retail investors who are committed to keep holding this investment, and they support the company whenever they can. Everything else being equal, I mean, there's a big difference between those two things, right? So I think there's a big future here, and I encourage anyone to read more about it.
Well, with you there, Chives, if you or a loved one owns stock, make sure it's directly registered.
That's it.
Tremendous.
And thank you so much, John, for having me on. Certainly going to be on the lookout for anything else that you're working on. You're doing some great work too, and as your listeners know, and I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Chives.